I've never been the kind of person to believe in the supernatural. I always figured ghost stories were just that, stories. But after what happened to me last winter, I don't think I'll ever feel safe in my own home again. It started when I moved into my new apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom place in an older building on the outskirts of the city. The price was surprisingly low for the area, but I figured it was because of the outdated appliances and the fact that it hadn't been renovated in years. I didn't mind. I just needed a place to get back on my feet after a rough breakup. At first, everything seemed fine. The apartment had a slightly musty smell, and the floors creaked when I walked, but I chalked that up to age. Then I started noticing little things. It began with the lights. Some nights, I'd come home from work to find that the kitchen light was on, even though I was sure I had turned it off before leaving. Other times, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see the light in the hallway flickering, like someone was standing just outside my bedroom flipping the switch. I told myself it was faulty wiring. Then my keys started going missing. I always kept them on a small hook near the door, but some mornings they'd be on the kitchen counter or the floor by my bed. One night, I found them in the bathroom sink, wet like they had been submerged in water. At that point, I figured I was just overtired, maybe forgetting things. I'd been dealing with a lot of stress. But then came the scratches. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed faint red marks on my arm. Thin, almost like fingernail scratches. I had no idea how they got there. They weren't deep, but they weren't random either. They were parallel, evenly spaced. I tried to ignore it. But each morning after that, I'd wake up with more. Some were on my legs, my back, places I couldn't have accidentally scratched in my sleep. And then one night, I heard it. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of breathing. Not mine. It was slow, shallow, coming from inside my room. I froze, barely breathing myself, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The room was pitch black, but I could feel it. Someone was there. I reached for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The second the light filled the room, the breathing stopped, and the closet door, which had been closed when I went to bed, was now open. That night I barely slept. I kept telling myself that maybe I had left the door open, maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the next morning, I found footprints. They were faint, just barely visible in the dust on the hardwood floor. Bare feet, small, like a child's. And they led from my closet to the side of my bed. I tried everything to convince myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe the previous tenant had a pet or a kid that left the prints behind. Maybe I had tracked something in without realizing it. Then I heard the laughter. I was in the shower when I heard it. Software giggling. It was distant, but unmistakable. It sounded like it was coming from the living room. I turned off the water, my body covered in goosebumps. I stood there, straining to listen, heart hammering in my chest. Silence. I stepped out, wrapping a towel around myself, and cautiously peeked out into the hallway. Nothing. But when I walked into the living room, I saw it. A single wet footprint on the floor, right in front of my couch. That was the night I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I called my friend Mark, told him everything, and asked if I could crash at his place for a few nights. He could tell I was shaken, so he didn't ask too many questions. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and was about to walk out when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My closet door was open again. I never left it open. But what made it worse, so much worse, was that there was something on the inside of the door. Scratches. Not just random marks. Words. Let me in. I ran. I stayed with Mark for a few days, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that apartment wasn't done with me. Then on the third night, Mark shook me awake in the middle of the night. "Dude," he said, his voice shaking. "Someone's in the living room." I jumped up, adrenaline surging through me. We crept toward the door, listening. Laughter, software childlike, coming from the corner of the room. Mark flipped on the light. There was nothing there. But on his coffee table, sitting in a neat little pile, were my keys. The same ones I had left in my apartment. I moved out the next day. I don't know what was in that apartment, and I don't want to know. But I did some research on the building afterward. Turns out, in 1994, a woman who lived in my unit had a 7-year-old son who went missing. She told the police that she heard him talking to someone in his room the night before he disappeared. The only clue they ever found was a single wet footprint in the hallway. They never found his body, and sometimes I wonder if he ever left at all. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes until sunset. Neighbors smiled at each other from their porches, and nothing bad ever seemed to happen. But the summer of 2004 changed everything. That was the summer Kevin Dwyer disappeared. Kevin was my best friend. We were both 13, inseparable, always biking around the neighborhood or playing video games in my basement. He lived just a few houses down from me on Oak Ridge Drive, in a blue 2-story home with a basketball hoop in the driveway. And then, one day, he was just gone. No goodbyes, no signs of struggle, vanished. It happened on a Friday night. We had spent the afternoon messing around at the creek behind our neighborhood, daring each other to wade into the murky water. Kevin had seemed off that day, distracted, like something was bothering him. "You good, man?" I'd asked. Kevin hesitated before shrugging. "Just been having weird dreams." I laughed. "About what? The math test?" He shook his head. "Nah, about my house." That made me pause. "What do you mean?" Kevin kicked at a rock, avoiding my eyes. "I don't know. Just someone standing outside my window at night." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Like a burglar?" Kevin hesitated again. "Not really." That was the last real conversation we ever had. That night, Kevin never came home. His parents assumed he had stayed at my place, but when his mom called, my stomach dropped. I told her the truth. We had parted ways after the creek, and he had biked home. He should have made it there in 5 minutes. But he never did. The police searched everywhere, the woods, the creek, every house on our street. There was no sign of him. His bike was never found. His phone was in his room, untouched. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. And the strangest part? His bedroom window was open. The weeks that followed were a blur. Search parties. Flyers with his face plastered on every telephone pole. Candlelight vigils. His parents were destroyed. And then slowly, life moved on. But I didn't. Because at night, I started having dreams. Dreams about Kevin. At first, they were memories. Us playing in his backyard, racing bikes down the street, stupid inside jokes. But then, they got weird. The memories started changing. Small details that didn't make sense. In one dream, Kevin's house was wrong. The doors too tall, the windows too wide. And then I saw him, standing outside Kevin's window. Tall, thin, dressed in black, watching. I woke up drenched in sweat. One night I finally worked up the nerve to go to Kevin's house. His parents had moved away after the disappearance, and the house had been sitting vacant for months. Something about it felt off, like the air around it was heavier, I walked around to the backyard, shining my flashlight up at Kevin's old window. It was open, just like the night he disappeared. That's when I heard it. A whisper, right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam bouncing off the trees. Nothing. Just silence. I told myself I was being paranoid and turned back to the window. And that's when I saw Kevin, standing in his room, looking down at me. I screamed. The flashlight slipped from my hands as I stumbled back, my chest tight with panic. But when I looked again, the window was empty. The house was still abandoned. But I knew what I saw. I knew it was Kevin, and he was trying to tell me something. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided I had to go back. I told myself it was grief messing with my head, that I had imagined it. But I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut. So I went back. And this time, I went inside. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. Dust coated everything. The furniture was gone, but the walls were still covered in Kevin's childhood drawings. And then I heard it. Footsteps, coming from upstairs, from Kevin's room. I moved slowly, my heart pounding. As I reached the top of the stairs, the hallway felt wrong. Longer than I remembered, darker. Kevin's door was open. I stepped inside, and everything was exactly the same as the night he disappeared. The bed unmade, posters on the wall, and the window open. The air was ice cold. Then, the closet door creaked. I turned. It was slightly ajar. Something moved inside. And then, I heard Kevin's voice. "Help me!" I ran. I bolted out of that house faster than I've ever run in my life. I didn't stop until I was back home, locking every door, every window. I didn't sleep that night. But the next morning, I called the police. I told them I had seen something in Kevin's old house, that they needed to check the closet. They did. And what they found still haunts me to this day. Inside the closet, they discovered a small hidden door, covered by a loose panel. It led to a crawlspace between the walls, and in that crawlspace, they found bones. Human bones. Buried deep beneath layers of old clothes and rotting wood. Kevin's bones. His death was ruled a homicide, but no one could explain how his body ended up there when the house had been searched multiple times. No one could explain why his bedroom window had been left open that night, or why the whispering never stopped. I moved away from that neighborhood a few years later, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up and swear I can hear tapping at my window. And when I look outside, I see Kevin, standing there, watching, just like he had been watching that night